Alrighty, so I'm unmuted, I hope, and you're seeing my computer screen here. So we're going to be covering, let's move over to here. And again, we're going to put the disclaimer up, right? So an overview of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Now, last week I went through the whole presentation, of which there's quite a few slides. But this week, I want to get right into the nitty-gritty of some of the videos I didn't show last week. And there's a couple of them that, well, there's one of them specifically about 20 minutes long. It's absolutely phenomenal. But I want to talk a little bit about, well, cryptos, but not just so much the crypto situation we're finding ourselves moving into, or Bitcoin, but the system we're involved in now, that a lot of people don't really understand the system they're involved in, which of course is fiat currencies. And let's start off with a little bit about fiat currencies. Now, last week we were talking about how Bitcoin could potentially get up to, $500,000, $1 million a coin. And people are having difficulty understanding that simply because they can't relate it to anything. But then again, they can't relate it to anything because they can't understand the system they're involved in now. So what we were talking about here is right now we've got the 9 major currency pairs, which are the euro, the yen, the New Zealand Australian dollars, the yuan, the Swiss franc, the British pound, the US dollar, and the Canadian dollar. Those are the 9 major currency pairs around the world. Now, there's a lot of other currencies around the world. There's the Zimbabwean dollar, and there's the pesos, and God knows what. But these are the ones that command the market. It's called the Forex market, or the foreign exchange market. And it does it does well over $5 trillion a day. There's this really a billion and a trillion. As a billion is 30 seconds. If you take it in times, a trillion seconds is 30 years. Whereas a trillion seconds is 30,000 years. It's a massive difference. Now, when these currencies trade against each other, so if you're in the States and you're going down to Mexico, you've got to go to a currency exchange or a bank and exchange American dollars for pesos. And, if you're doing business in Europe, we've got to change our Canadian dollars for euros, or euros for yen, or yen for British pounds, as business is conducted around the world to the tune of $5 trillion a day. And these are called fiat currencies, and they are backed by nothing. 1972, Richard Nixon took the gold backing away, and they became what were fiat currencies. So this is, whenever we talk fiat currencies, this is what we're talking about, is the currency situation we're involved. Now, let's just watch the video real quick. And if it's loud at your end, turn your volume down at your end. If it's quiet at your end, turn the volume up at your end. That's under your control. So let's just get a little bit of understanding about what fiat currencies are.
Well, fiat currency, of course, is a currency that exists at the dictate or by fiat from a government. You say they have their printing presses, and the paper money rolls off the printing presses. And then they give it the fiat designation, which makes the currency official. It's just worthless paper. But when Ben Bernanke gives it the special sign, and they have the cult meeting at the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, it suddenly becomes currency.
If you look at what's really going on, it's a con game. And so there's confidence. Well, the Federal Reserve is very forthright about what they're doing. If you read their websites, they'll tell you it's a confidence game. They tell you that there's no intrinsic value in their money. They'll tell you that they print it backed by absolutely nothing. They actually display all these facts. But if you tell somebody in the public that this stuff is created out of thin air, there's no backing whatsoever, it's absolutely worthless, it's about as valuable as monopoly money, they'll look at you like you're nuts.
Kind of interesting. Now, I learned a long time ago the difference between currency and money. I used to think that this stuff here was money because that's what we're taught. It's got nothing to do with money. This is called currency. Money is a true store of wealth or a true store of value over time. Gold is money. Gold is a true store of value over time. Currency represents money. So when the currencies were taken away from the gold standard, so to speak, in 1972, it became, as he says, worthless. The only worth that this has is the value that people give it in holding it. So since that point in time, I'm basically switching, or I have enough fiat currency in my bank accounts to handle the bills. That's all I'm doing, paying the mortgage, pay the car payments, whatever it is. But anything else, I don't keep in fiat currencies. I put into gold. And now, more increasingly, I'm putting into cryptocurrencies, which is the evolution of this stuff here. We're moving into cryptos, which is the evolution of that. So let's just move forward here a little bit. So that's a little bit about fiat currencies, and that's all we need to say. It's backed by nothing, virtually worthless. So you want to get your fiat currency into things that is worth something, which in this case is, well, gold or whatever. Now, this is a really good little clip here by Don Tapscott. I strongly suggest you go to TED.com and watch the entire video. It's about 40 minutes long and absolutely brilliant. And then watch the other things about blockchain and Bitcoin on TED. But this is a rendered clip that I've taken the important bit of. So let's just watch this.
The technology likely to have the greatest impact on the next few decades has arrived. And it's not social media, it's not big data, it's not robotics, it's not even AI. And you'll be surprised to learn that it's the underlying technology of digital currencies like Bitcoin. It's called the blockchain. Blockchain. Now, it's not the most sonorous word in the world, but I believe that this is now the next generation of the internet, and that it holds vast promise for every business, every society, and for all of you individually. You know, for the past few decades, we've had the internet of information. And when I send you an email or a PowerPoint file or something, I'm actually not sending you the original, I'm sending you a copy. And that's great. This is democratized information. But when it comes to assets, things like money, financial assets like stocks and bonds, loyalty points, intellectual property, music, art, a vote, carbon credit, and other assets, sending you a copy is a really bad idea. If I send you $100, it's really important that I don't still have money and that I can't send it to you. So this has been called the double spend problem by cryptographers for a long time. So today, we rely entirely on big intermediaries, middlemen like banks, government, big social media companies, credit card companies, and so on, to establish trust in our economy. And these intermediaries perform all the business and transaction logic of every kind of commerce, from authentication, identification of people, through to clearing, settling, and record keeping. And overall, they do a pretty good job, but there are growing problems. To begin, they're centralized. That means that they can be hacked, and increasingly are. And JP Morgan, the US federal government, LinkedIn, Home Depot, and others found that out the hard way. They exclude billions of people from the global economy. For example, people who don't have enough money to have a bank account. They slow things down. It can take a second for an email to go around the world, but it can take days or weeks for money to move through the banking system across the city. And they take a big piece of the action, 10 to 20%, just to send money to another country. They capture our data, and that means that we can't monetize it or use it to better manage our lives. And our privacy is being undermined. And the biggest problem is that overall, they've appropriated the largesse of the digital age asymmetrically. In 2008, the financial industry crashed, and perhaps propitiously, an unknown or anonymous person or persons named Satoshi Nakamoto created a paper where he developed a protocol for a digital cash that used an underlying cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. And this cryptocurrency enabled people to establish trust and do transactions without a third party. And the seemingly simple act set off a spark that's ignited the world, that has everyone excited or terrified or otherwise interested in many places. But the real pony here is the underlying technology. It's called blockchain. So for the first time now in human history, people everywhere can trust each other and transact peer-to-peer. And trust is established not by some big institution, but by collaboration, by cryptography, and by some clever code. And because trust is native to the technology, I call this the trust protocol. Now you're probably wondering, well, how does this thing work? Fair enough. Assets, digital assets like money to music and everything in between, are not stored in a central place, but they're distributed across a global ledger using the highest level of cryptography. And when a transaction is conducted, it's posted globally across millions and millions of computers. And out there around the world is a group of people called miners. These are not young people, they're Bitcoin miners. And they have massive computing power at their fingertips, 10 to 100 times bigger than all of Google worldwide. And these miners do a lot of work. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, a block gets created that has all the transactions from the previous 10 minutes. And then, this is the key part, that block is linked to the previous block and the previous block to create a chain of blocks. And everyone is time-stamped, kind of like with a digital wax seal. So if I wanted to go and hack a block and say, pay you and you with the same money, I'd have to hack that block, plus all the preceding blocks, the entire history of commerce on that blockchain, not just on one computer, but across millions of computers simultaneously, all using the highest levels of encryption in the light of the most powerful computing resource in the world that's watching me. Tough to do. And this is infinitely more secure than the computer systems that we have today. Blockchain, that's how it works.
There you go. That's how it works. Blockchain is absolutely amazing. Now, as you probably know, your bank accounts have already been hacked into, and so is your credit cards, and so is all of your information on the entire planet. It's all been hacked. There's no doubt about that. So blockchains are unhackable. That's why everything is moving to blockchain, which is an interesting technology. So you've got to understand blockchain. And with Bitcoin, it's incredible because there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoins are ever going to be mined. So it becomes anti-inflationary. The thing with currency is the more currency you develop or print or put into circulation, the less valuable it becomes, which is inflationary. And people don't understand inflation. So I'm going to jump forward here a few slides to, where do we want to go to now? Slide number 44, I believe. Right up to here is where it's at. Slide number, we're going to talk about the financial industry and Bitcoin. And here we have Lagarde on October the 13th. And again, I went through this last week, and the video is on in the back office, and I strongly suggest you watch that. But October the 13th, she basically came out in front of, I think it was the London Economic Forum with, 1,000 of the top economic people on the planet, hedge fund managers and bank people, and, the people that run the show, financially speaking, were there listening to her. And she's saying that cryptos must be taken seriously. Now, Christine Lagarde at the head of the IMF there, one single word in a sentence, she says, can make or lose millions of dollars within portfolios. And she said here that Bitcoin puts a question mark on the fractional banking model we know today. And in a remarkably frank talk, she speculated that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is as much future as the internet itself, and it could displace central banks, conventional banking, and challenge the monopoly of national monies. Now, let's learn a little bit about inflation first. No, let's get right into fractional banking. Now, fractional banking is the system we're involved in now. This is why your currency goes down in value consistently every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, and every year. It just costs more and more and more to get less and less and less because of the fractional banking system. Now, this system is finished. It's over. It's already bankrupt. It's about $1,000 trillion now in debt, globally speaking. We'll never get out of it. So the evolution of this now is moving into cryptocurrencies. But understanding fractional banking is vitally important. Does understanding the system you're involved in now and why you want to get out of that system and into money or gold, and also into cryptos, which is totally 100% blockchained and owned by you and not under control of anybody else. So notepads and pens out. This takes about 20 minutes. It's absolutely a phenomenal video, and I would strongly suggest you pay careful attention to what this is all about here. So let's get right into it. Now, if you can find this on the internet, now way back in the day, it took me ages to find Modern Money Mechanics, and I've got it printed and got the PDF and so on and so forth. I've got to find it where I saved it now. But this is it. It's a little thin booklet that's the blueprint for the monetary system we're involved in now. So listen carefully, folks.
Society today is composed of a series of institutions. From political institutions, legal institutions, religious institutions, to institutions of social class, familial values, and occupational specialization. It is obvious the profound influence these traditionalized structures have in shaping our understandings and perspectives. Yet, of all the social institutions we are born into, directed by, and conditioned upon, there seems to be no system as taken for granted and misunderstood as the monetary system. Taking on nearly religious proportions, the established monetary institution exists as one of the most unquestioned forms of faith there is. How money is created, the policies by which it is governed, and how it truly affects society are unregistered interests of the great majority of the population. Unfortunately, economics is often viewed with confusion and boredom. Endless streams of financial jargon coupled with intimidating mathematics quickly deters people from attempts at understanding it. However, the fact is, the complexity associated with the financial system is a mere mask, designed to conceal one of the most socially paralyzing structures humanity has ever endured. A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies, saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the set. The Fed then takes these notes and trades them for the bonds. Once this exchange is complete, the government then takes the $10 billion in Federal Reserve notes and deposits it into a bank account. And upon this deposit, the paper notes officially become legal tender money, adding $10 billion to the U.S. money supply. And there it is. $10 billion in new money has been created. Of course, this example is a generalization, for, in reality, this transaction would occur electronically, with no paper used at all. In fact, only 3% of the U.S. money supply exists in physical currency. The other 97% essentially exists in computers alone. Now, government bonds are, by design, instruments of debt. And when the Fed purchases these bonds, with money it essentially created out of thin air, the government is actually promising to pay back that money to the Fed. In other words, the money was created out of debt. This mind-numbing paradox of how money or value can be created out of debt or a liability will become more clear as we further this exercise. So, the exchange has been made and now $10 billion sits in a commercial bank account. Here's where it gets really interesting. For as based on the fractional reserve practice, that $10 billion deposit instantly becomes part of the bank's reserves, just as all deposits do. And regarding reserve requirements, as stated in modern money mechanics, a bank must maintain legally required reserves equal to a prescribed percentage of its deposits. It then quantifies this by stating, under current regulations, the reserve requirement against most transaction accounts is 10%. This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10% or $1 billion is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be used as the basis for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in modern money mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, creating an additional 7.2 billion, to 6.5 billion, to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original $10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air. So, now that we understand how money is created by this fractional reserve banking system, a logical yet elusive question might come to mind. What is actually giving this newly created money value? The answer? The money that already exists. The new money essentially steals value from the existing money supply. For the total pool of money is being increased irrespective to demand for goods and services. And as supply and demand finds equilibrium, prices rise, diminishing the purchasing power of each individual dollar. This is generally referred to as inflation, and inflation is essentially a hidden tax on the public.
What is the advice that you generally get? And that is inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this: how in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Of course, it can't. The fractional reserve system of monetary expansion is inherently inflationary. For the act of expanding the money supply without there being a proportional expansion of goods and services in the economy will always debase a currency. In fact, a quick glance at the historical values of the US dollar versus the money supply reflects this point definitively, for the inverse relationship is obvious. $1 in 1913 required $21.60 in 2007 to match value. That is a 96% devaluation since the Federal Reserve came into existence. Now, if this reality of inherent and perpetual inflation seems absurd and economically self-defeating, hold that thought, for absurdity is an understatement in regard to how our financial system really operates. For in our financial system, money is debt, and debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government, there would not be $1 in circulation. Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value, in turn debasing the existing money supply, raising prices in society. And since all this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce, people become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists, where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pool enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. As dysfunctional and backwards as all of this might seem, there is still one thing we have omitted from this equation. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself: the application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. Think about it. Money is created out of debt. And what do people do when they are in debt? They submit to employment to pay it off. But if money can only be created out of loans, how can society ever be debt-free? It can't. And that's the point. And it is the fear of losing assets coupled with the struggle to keep up with the perpetual debt and inflation inherent in the system, compounded by the inescapable scarcity within the money supply itself, created by the interest that can never be repaid, that keeps the wage slave in line, running on the hamster wheel with millions of others, in effect powering an empire that truly benefits only the elite at the top of the pyramid. For, at the end of the day, who are you really working for? The banks. Money is created in a bank and invariably ends up in a bank. They are the true masters, along with the corporations and governments they support. Physical slavery requires people to be housed and fed. Economic slavery requires people to feed and house themselves. It is one of the most ingenious scams for social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies, and interest is its prime ammunition. Terry Fund.
All very dramatic stuff, and I tell you, very, very impressive. As I say, I found this Modern Money Mechanics on PDF online. If you can find it, great. Print it out and go through it. But this is the crux of the whole thing. We are in an inflationary system, and that inflationary system is, well, the fiat currency system that we're involved in right now. So by getting out of that system, see, cryptos is anti-inflationary. And the one reason it's anti-inflationary is because they're not coming out and printing more and more and more and more Bitcoin. There's only going to be a certain amount of Bitcoin. When that blockchain is developed, built into the blockchain is the amount of coins or the value of the currency that's going to be in there. So you're getting out of one system into the other. The fractional banking system is broken. And that's why Bitcoin puts a question mark on the fractional banking system we know today. So if you can find that, Zeitgeist, Z-E-I-G-I-S-T, Zeitgeist movie, addendum, I believe I got that from. It's on the internet. You can find it anywhere else. So let's now learn a little bit more about inflation. Now, again, I got out of this system maybe a decade, 15 years ago. What I do now is I say, hey, with a fractional banking system, with a fiat currency system, I have enough that I just put through the banks to pay my bills, to pay the mortgage, to pay my car payments. Well, I don't need a car payment. I bought my car for cash, but insurance and things of that nature. Anything else I do not leave in fiat currency. It's put into gold, which is money, a true store of value over time, and now into cryptos like Bitcoin, because they're anti-inflationary and the evolution of the system that is so bankrupt it's not even funny. So let's learn a little bit more about inflation.
It is sometimes amazing that we haven't experienced more inflation than we have. If they keep expanding the money supply so vastly, why aren't our prices growing faster than they really are? And the answer is that a good chunk of the money that the Fed created has been shipped overseas. I remember early in my research, I heard this expression that the Americans have exported their inflation. I thought, what is that? How can you export your inflation? Put it in a box and send it out? What do you do? Well, now I understand. You export your inflation by simply sending all these dollars that you created to these other countries, and then they send you their refrigerators and their cars and whatever, their TV sets. So you get hardware, and they get little pieces of paper. It's a great deal for the American people for a while. For a while. Sooner or later, all of those pigeons come home to roost. When the time comes, as it looks like it's now coming, when the rest of the world is saying, we don't want to play this game anymore, Uncle Sam's dollars are just becoming worthless, there are too many of them, we've got to find something else other than American dollars, then those dollars start to come back to America. People say, we don't want them anymore. What do we do with them? Once this revs up and we've got this little trickle of money coming back that we previously exported, once it becomes a flood and it starts to rush back, now we are getting our former exported inflation brought back to us, and then we'll see the quantity of money inside the United States grow much more rapidly even than the Federal Reserve can create it, because we're getting a previous money back. And that's when we will really see the tanking of the U.S. dollar in terms of what it will buy.
Now, that's an interesting analogy, because that's exactly what's beginning to happen right now. Trump is getting the United States under control. He's getting the drug gang sorted out. He's getting the opiates and suing the pharmaceutical companies and getting drugs under control. He's putting up vocational centers left, right, and center. So you're going to have getting the wall and the immigration under control. So you're going to have a much higher educated, and with the taxes that he's just brought in, higher paid workforce. So if you're an international corporation out there, right now and into the near future, America, United States, is going to be the place to have your company manufacturing your products. But also what's happening here is you've got companies now with the changes in the tax law bringing back billions and hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars back into the United States. Apple, for instance, is bringing back, what, $340 billion and putting up educational centers and manufacturing centers, and Foxconn is coming in. And so America is going to become a manufacturing base again, globally speaking, specifically with high tech. He's put tariffs on steel and aluminum with other countries and so on and so forth. And when these trillions of dollars start coming back into the States, the value of the American dollar is going to go down, and it's beginning to do that. So what does that mean? Well, it means for the people that have got a higher wages, so to speak, because of their taxes, well, you can buy, a little bit more, a little bit less, but the value of that dollar is going down. But it also means it's cheaper to buy American stuff. Because if you're in Europe or you're in Japan or you're in China and you want to buy American stuff now, it's expensive to buy. So you don't. You go to China or somewhere and buy it. But in the near future, it's going to be cheaper to buy American stuff manufactured in America. And you're going to use what? American dollars in your reserves to buy the American stuff that they're manufacturing. And the opposite is going to be true. They're going to be sending you the refrigerators and the cars and the computers and so on and so forth from the United States. So inflation in the United States is going to increase here very quickly. So let's talk a little bit about money supply. And again, this next chap here, Mike Maloney, does a brilliant job of explaining this.
In the past several years, I've spoken in many countries about the crisis that's coming, and a lot of people think that they're going to be okay in their country, that it's only going to happen to the United States or maybe the United States in Europe. But what they don't realize is that this is a global phenomenon. I got to show you something here. This is base currency in the United States. This is the number of paper dollars that exist, basically. It took 200 years to go from no dollars in existence to 825 billion. And then we had the bailouts, and then we had QE1, quantitative easing 1, then QE2, and then we had QE3, and then QE4, and then soon we're going to have QE57 and QE382. And it isn't just here. This is what the Canadian currency supply looks like. This is Australia, South Africa, Russia. Now, this starts out in just the year 2001, and this is like 18 times more currency in existence in a little over a decade. Here's Singapore, same story. Look at that, since the crisis, just bam. India, China, every government on the planet is doing this insane deficit spending and expanding their currency supplies, doing bailouts, and history shows that there is no example of this turning out well.
There's no example of this turning out well, which is again why all this fiat currency stuff is absolutely worthless. See, QE1, to get out of the 2008 financial crash that occurred, well, the government basically said, okay, we'll buy you out and bail you out this time. It's the last time ever, though, they came out with this quantitative easing, and they were printing at $80 billion a month from the Federal Reserve, which has got nothing to do with the American government. The Federal Reserve is just simply an incorporated company owned by a few private individuals, like the Rothschilds and Sinclairs, those guys that run the show. And so 80 billion, well, it could be worth up to 8 times that. There was hundreds of billions of dollars a month going into the American economy, which meant the American dollar was coming down in value, which meant it was cheaper to buy American stuff than it was to buy European stuff. So what does Europe do? Well, they go, hang on a second, people aren't buying our manufactured goods anymore. They're going over to the States. So we'll print some money too. So the European Union started printing euros like it was going out of style to bring the value of the euro down as fast as they could. And then the Japanese are looking at this saying, well, hang on, we're going to play the same game, because if American value is going down, the euro is going down. It means that stuff manufactured in Japan is going up in value. We'll print some too. And that's why governments all around the world started printing cash like it was unbelievable. And now it's worth, well, there's about $1,000 trillion more cash in the economies today since there was in 2008. And that thousands of trillions of cash is out there in the economy. It's so easy to make huge amounts of money right now than ever before in the history of mankind. Absolutely phenomenal. So let's go right into, I got to change slides here a little bit here. And I want to get into now talking about inflation rates, right? So the best place to go is obviously the World Bank. Now, I didn't physically go there. I just got on the internet and checked it out. And there was a 5 years worth of inflation rates, 2011 through 2015. I put this together about 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's a little bit out of date, but it gives you the gist of it. The World Bank's inflation rates by country. And so let's just take a look at this here. So if we take Australia, and it's alphabetical, just a few of the countries around the world, not every single country, but every single country is within this range here. So if you took Australia, for instance, and you had $100,000 in the bank in 2011, then 5 years later, it had a 2.5% inflation rate. So what does it mean? It means that every day, every week, every month, and every year, the value of your $100,000 is going down by this amount. You're losing $7 a day, $48 a week, $208 a month, and $2,500 a year. So an Australian would have to put $208 a month into their account to keep up with inflation, which means that they're working harder to earn less. So obviously after 5 years, the value or the purchasing power of that $100,000 was only $87,1200. Now, it doesn't mean you've got $87,500 left in your account. You've still got $100,000. But let's say a house that cost $100,000 5 years later would cost you $112,500. That is what inflation means. And if you got your $100,000 stuck in your bank account consistently over that period of time, you're literally flushing value down the toilet. Now let's have a look at Brazil, 6.3 inflation rate. Well, every day they're losing 17%. Every week, 121. Every month, $525 a month. They've got to put into their bank accounts just to keep up with inflation, $6,000 a year. So their $100,000 after 5 years was worth $68,500 at 6.3%. And it's interesting, what we got Venezuela, we got Brazil, and we got Argentina. The three biggest, most important economies basically in South America are absolutely, totally gazongas. They're gone. They're finished. If you live in one of those countries, you need to get out of an inflationary system based on fiat currency. Canada, well, we're 1.9, but again, there's hidden inflation in here. But even so, as Canadians, well, that's not too much fun, is it? China, well, that's not too much fun either. But their economy is growing so great. They talk about the increase of the economy. They never talk about inflation much. Costa Rica, well, this is back then. Costa Rica now has been wiped off the map. They had a bit of a wind come through last year, right? A bit of a hurricane, and they're still recovering. Half the country is still under, it doesn't got power anymore. So I can guarantee their inflation has gone through the roof. They've had to borrow. In fact, they've gone bankrupt as far as the government's concerned. Right? So not much fun in Costa Rica. Egypt, one of the poorest nations on the planet as far as people are concerned. Now, if people took $100,000 and they exchanged it into gold, they'd still have $100,000 worth of gold. But then again, the Egypt, I can't afford to buy gold. So no, of course you can. You can get gold at $100, $1,000. It's exchange and not purchase. And I keep going through this. You're not buying gold. It doesn't cost anything. It's an exchange. If you've got $1,000 in fiat currencies and you walk into a gold exchange and you hand your cash over, you walk out with, minus the exchange fee, $1,000 worth of gold. Now, as the fiat currency goes down in value, your gold holds the value because it's money. And more these days, if you exchange fiat to cryptos like Bitcoin, Again, it's a true store of value. It's going up in value significantly. What's going on in India here? 6.4%. The 100,000 becomes worth 68. Kenya, and the floods and the famine and the Kenya is off the map economically as well. The floods that are going on out there right now because of climate change are unreal, absolutely unreal. Mexico, 4%, and that's getting worse. Pakistan, not much fun in Pakistan. And again, the flooding they've had prior to, and the heat waves that they've got right out there now because of climate change, prior to the monsoons that are going on. Nations are now really, the populations of nations are becoming really, really under financial stress. The Philippines, Russia, 7.8% in Russia. South Sudan, poorest country on the planet. I mean, just ridiculous. I mean, 100,000, they've still got 100,000 in the bank, but what would have cost like a home, $100,000, now cost them 236,500 over the 5-year period. You got to put 3,942 a month into their account just to keep up with that. And there's no way in the world that South Sudanese can even begin to think about that. United States, you guys down south of the border here, 1.6, and that's going to be increasing. It's going to go to 1.7, 1.9, 2%, and so on and so forth as the trillions start pouring in now over the next couple of years here. So again, you've got to get out of fiat, and you've got to get into money or gold, and you've got to get into cryptos and hedge against this. And Venezuela, Venezuela, it's and this was back in February the 4th, 2016. Venezuela president declares economic emergency as inflation hits 141%, and they ran out of the true value, or the true recognition that they were running out of currency in that country is when they ran out of toilet paper. That was the beginning of their economic crisis. Big headlines: Venezuela has run out of toilet paper, and the only manufacturing company that manufactured toilet paper in Venezuela went out of business. They went bankrupt. And they can't afford to import the stuff. So they can't get anything in Venezuela. They can't get food. They can't get medicine. They can't get fuel. They can't get millions, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people now have left Venezuela. They've just packed up shop and gone into the neighboring countries. It's just an absolute economic disaster what's happened in that country. And that's just across the border down the way a bit, remaining purchasing power. So it's a scary thing. Meanwhile, while that's been going on, let's just go to my my slide here and showing you what's happened. As one system is collapsing, there's a new system that is increasing in value simply because this fiat currency system has finished. It finished in 2008 with a financial collapse, and it's going through the last gasps, so to speak. Maybe even back then they were saying we've got about a decade left before it's over. And now we're a decade ahead of when that happens. So, we've got about 5 years left, really. And what's happening now is people are taking control of their own financial situation by getting into cryptos. Now, April the 1st last year is when I got involved. Now, to give you an example here, when I looked at cryptocurrencies back in 2008, a good friend of mine, a business acquaintance, came up to me and said, listen, get $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. It's 10 cents a piece. And you need just to get $1,000 worth. And my question was, well, what does Bitcoin do? Well, you can send it to somebody else on the other side of the planet for next to no fees. There's no transfer fees or SWIFT codes or wire transfer fees, etc. And it's easy to do. My answer was, well, first of all, I don't know someone on the other side of the planet. And secondly, I certainly wouldn't be giving them $1,000 if I did. So I didn't get involved. Now, $1,000 divided by 10 cents was 10,000 coins I could have got. Well, Bitcoin became upwards of 24,000 Canadian dollars just prior to Christmas. So my 10,000 coins times $20,000 would have been worth $200 million. I would have been worth $200 million. I would have been worth. But I didn't get involved because I wasn't listening, and I wasn't listening because I didn't understand. And I watched this thing go to $100, $10 up and down like a yo-yo. And then April the 1st, Bitcoin becomes legal tender in Japan. I said, I'm in. I don't care what it's about. I don't understand it. I don't care. I'm in. And I cashed in some of my gold, some of my money, and went down to the Bitcoin exchange here in Calgary and walked in with some cash and said, here, I want to get some Bitcoin. Great. Send me a QR code. Well, what the dickens is a QR code? Well, you need an e-wallet. Well, what's an e-wallet? Well, go to your Apple account. So I logged in on my phone, went to the App Store and downloaded an e-wallet called Copay. Took about all of 2 minutes. They're going, great. And I click on receive. So I clicked on receive, a little square barcode came up. They scanned it. And within minutes, bang, I had Bitcoin in my e-wallet and I was in. And that was the beginning of my Bitcoin experience. And then what happened here? Well, shortly afterwards, now the funny thing is when I cashed in my gold, when you cash it in at the gold exchange, they're going to ask you, what do you want it for? What do you want the cash for? Why are you cashing it in? They said, oh, I'm buying Bitcoin. These guys laughed their heads off. You go, no, you'll never make money in Bitcoin. You want to stay in gold. I go, no, I don't think so. Well, a few weeks later, Bitcoin became more valuable than gold, and it kept going up and up and up. Then all of a sudden, it came all the way down here. Now, I've been trading Forex for about 19, 18 years now, and I know about the Fibonacci numbers. 38.2% is a vitally important retracement number. And as everyone out there is going, whoa, doom and gloom, and all my friends that saw me get into this are now justified and puffing their chests out, all excited. Oh, you're going to lose everything. I'm going, no, I got more. I went and cashed in more gold and got more at this point here. And then what? Well, it went up, and then it came back down again. And then what did I do here? I got more. Now, it's called dollar cost averaging. If you're getting at the peak and it comes down, obviously you're losing on the exchange. But if you're getting low and it goes up, you're making a profit. So if you're getting consistently over time, it averages out so that the average is obviously going to be more than your initial cost. And I wasn't buying Bitcoin at $2,000. I was buying, because you don't have to get $2,000 worth of Bitcoin or Bitcoin. I was getting $200 a week, and then I was getting an extra $500 because I did a website or whatever. I was building some websites. Anything spare that I had in fiat currency, I exchanged into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin went through the roof. And as you can see, October the 13th, U.S. banks allowed immediate execution of Bitcoin through Coinbase, and that weekend it jumped about $1,500 US that week. And then what happened? Bitcoin derivatives exchanges got involved. Bitcoin futures exchanges got involved. The capitalization went through the roof. And again, I strongly suggest you watch the video we did last week. And then it hit a peak of, I don't know what it was, about 18,000 US dollars or whatever. And then it came right back down to just right over under 6,400 American dollars, which was a 61.8 retracement, which was the end of the first cycle, so to speak, the end of the first, in Fibonacci terminology, it's a very important number. So again, what did we do? I was lucky enough to recognize what was going on, not lucky enough, but educated enough to know what was going on. And I started cashing in my Bitcoin as it was beginning to go down. So when it got down to 18,000, I cashed some in, and 14,000, I cashed some in, and 10,000 US, I cashed some in, and I bought back all the gold I'd put in, replaced my gold holdings, and then doubled the amount of gold I started with in the first place. Had enough left over to put a deposit for a mortgage down on a townhouse here in Calgary, pay off the credit cards, pay off all my debt, paid off absolutely everything, still have 1.4 Bitcoin left, and the rest I'd exchanged into things like Ethereum, Litecoin, IOTA, and these other funny coins you hear about that I learned about over time. And I'm now sitting in a very, very, very financially healthy situation with, again, the smallest amount of fiat currency in my bank account that I need to pay the bills, and the vast majority of my financial assets now into gold and into cryptos. That's beginning to go through the roof because I've understood inflation and the collapse of the fiat currency system. So with that, that's all really I wanted to go through here today. Next Saturday, we'll be covering again some more important training and information for you. Here at CryptoCashNation, just logging into the back office real quick to show you where some of this stuff is. It doesn't take 2 seconds. I'm in here quite often. You got to get to know the back office like it's going out of style here. And I think it's under Community Chest. Here it is, yeah. Saturday, the last Saturday, Learn and Earn, The Rise of Bitcoin with Robin Costello. That's me. Click on here. Go to the video and watch that whole video, because that's a solid understanding of this. And then this webinar about inflation.